Hey, WCA, it's Mike Amori. Really excited to be working with you again and to wish you a great summer, which I really hope you guys all had. I want to show you a game that was played this past weekend in Norwalk, and the player with the white pieces is an expert, and I want you guys to start to know what these names and numbers you're going to hear, what they all mean. An expert rated player is someone who is between 2,000 and 2,200. And here in the United States, if your rating is over 2,200, you are a master. And then, of course, if you get into the high 2,000s, like 2,300, 2,400, then you can start earning your way toward international master. And then the top of the mountain is, of course, grandmaster. Okay, so the person playing black is an A player. That is somebody rated between 1,800 and 2,000. So when an A player and an expert play, you should expect a reasonably well-played game. And of course, they're going to make mistakes that masters probably won't make. And then that's how it works. The lower the rating, the more common certain mistakes are. Here in this game, black makes a couple of mistakes that are not so obvious at first, but I really want you to pay attention to how white got a good position here. Okay, so it's black's turn, and black in this position on their own decides to lock in their light squared bishop by playing the move e6. And whenever you see this setup with these pawns here on f7, e6, and d5, black against the London system does this to challenge white's best piece. So pause the video. In your opinion, what is white's best piece now? Well, there's not a whole lot to choose from, right? I mean, every white piece is on the back rank except for this bishop. So the bishop on f8 is planning to come to d6 to challenge this piece. Now, if you just develop your pieces randomly, like in this position, white could easily play the move knight f3. There's nothing wrong with the move. But white kind of have seen this idea before, and they played a very interesting idea. They played knight to d2. And at first sight, it seems like, why would you put the knight on that square? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, they generally don't want to put the knight on c3 because they want the c pawn to be able to fight for the center, like with c4, or to come to c3 to support the center. Okay, does that make sense? Either to attack the center or support it. But there's another reason, and it's very sneaky. The reason the knight on d2 came out is to leave the f3 square open. Why? Well, there's the challenge that we talked about, and white immediately takes, giving black a choice. They could take with the pawn. This game is completely equal if they take this way. The question is, are the double d pawns up here on d6 and d5, are they strong or are they weak? That's a very good question, and it's a question I can't answer right now. Later in the middle game, it would be up to white to prove that those pawns are a weakness, and then black would use those pawns in the center and then eventually maybe advance them and say, hey, no, they're not a weakness, they're a strength. However, in the game, that didn't happen because black took back with the queen, which allows white to play their idea. And it's a very strange looking idea. It's pawn f4, creating what we call a Stonewall structure. Let me put some highlights on. You see this open square down here that's green? You remember what was there? That was white's dark squared bishop, correct? When you set up a Stonewall structure, you're going to have an awesome grip on the e5 square, as you can see. When the center gets attacked, and this is what happened in the game, you can use your c pawn to support the structure, and you now have an official Stonewall position. Now, where does the name come from? It comes from an opening that black actually plays. Watch this. d4, e6, c4, F5. Let's turn the board around for a minute. I love when I can do that so quickly. Couple of moves. Knight F3, Knight F6, G3 to fianchetto the bishop, pawn to D5, bishop to G2, and C6. Look at that. That is in the exact same pawn structure that white had a minute ago, with the colors reversed, with one key difference, and it's the bishop here on C8. When you play any Stonewall structure, when you put these pawns like this, you get some benefits. Number one, you see the control of the E4 square that black has. It's pretty strong. You also you make it very difficult to white to break this structure. That's why they call it a Stonewall, but there are a couple of downsides. You've just put 5 of your 8 pawns on light squares, and these are all central pawns on light squares, which means you have permanently weakened some of your dark squares. So a typical example would be castle, bishop to D6, pawn B3. The idea of pawn B3 is to maybe play the move bishop A3 to trade off the dark squared bishop, but black would normally say no and put the bishop here, the queen there, and you could play bishop to B2 and castle, and you have a chess game, correct? Now watch this. Let's go back to the game we started with. Let's turn the board around like magic, and there's the move F4. White is telling black, look, I'm going to play a Stonewall structure, but I'm going to do it without my bad bishop. I've already traded that piece off. In return for the strength of the square here in the middle and getting rid of that dark squared bishop, black has some things in their favor. Number one, white has permanently weakened a lot of light squares. Number two, you see the pawn on E3? White has to be very careful that this thing doesn't get attacked. And I will put this in the blog. Always, always keep an eye on your weak squares. They're going to get attacked. So C5, pawn to C3, completing the Stonewall. Now, bishop to D7 here. Okay, it was a move. It looks like you're getting the bishop off the back line, but I don't think white was interested in trading this light squared bishop off. Like, they definitely were not going to check because this bishop here on D7 is kind of blocked by all these pawns, right? So we just continue developing, and it's at this point where black could have tried the move knight to G4. Now, what would make you think of that in the first place? It's pretty simple. Always look to attack your opponent's weak pawns. If you're going to play that move knight G4, just make sure there's no tactic, and there isn't. White doesn't have any checks, and white would probably have to play the move queen E2 to protect that pawn, which looks a little awkward because you are blocking in your bishop. Let's say we make a little trade here. Now, you have to take with your C pawn. You don't want to lose the pawn on F4, right? So you take with your C pawn, and now queen B6. You notice how black is attacking all these dark squares? And be very, very careful. This pawn is being attacked. You probably need to play a move like rook to B1 or move this knight so the queen protects. I don't know. It's looking already awkward. If you play a move like B3, black's just coming in on your dark squares. And you have to be really, really careful that you just don't play these moves without thinking. You attack the knight, for example, and queen C3. You're getting crushed on your dark squares. Rook to B1, and you just lost a really important pawn. This is not pretty for white. Okay, do you see how that happened? Just the move knight to G4, which black did not play. But maybe you would play in your own games because you're geniuses. All right. Black's turn. I think black makes a mistake here. Not a huge one, but it's a bit of a mistake. They play the move C4. It's not losing. He had a clear reason, he said after the game, to play C4 is that he wanted to play the move B5, B4, and break on the queen side. Because if you look at black's pawn chain, you see where this chain is pointing? That usually indicates the part of the board that you should play on. So his thinking was actually pretty good there. But the move bishop to e2, and I'll show you in a minute, knight a6. Now again, knight a6 is a move designed to support his pawn break. When you develop a piece for the first time in a chess game, you usually have very, very clear reasons. It's to support a piece. It's to support a square, especially in the center. A lot of times it supports a pawn break. But in order for black to make this knight useful on a6, he's going to have to play the move b5, b4, and then eventually hope that the knight can get involved on the queen side. Otherwise, the knight is kind of out of play. Does that make sense for everyone? I'm hoping that's pretty clear. Let's take a look at, what about this move knight g4 again? Just attack that pawn. How do you protect it? Can't protect it with the king. That would be illegal. You'd have to play a move like knight f1, and, you know, it's a game, and you can gain some time by kicking this knight away. But look at white's position right now. It's not like, you know, the greatest thing in the world. So maybe, again, just going after these weak squares can pay some dividends. But that's not what happened. After knight a6, white just hops the knight right into the center of the board. And then you'll notice now the bishop controls g4, so the knight on f6 isn't going anywhere. And it's at this point where I think white, his advantage is going to start to really show. If I put some highlights on, in my opinion, that knight on e5 is the strongest piece on the board right now. It's a really, really powerful piece. Bishop to c6. The idea was to try to chase this knight away by playing knight f to d7 and challenging this piece. You guys see that? There's one problem. It takes way too much time. So white castles the king. There's the challenge. Now, taking the knight, okay, you can take black's knight if you think that helps you. You can support your knight with knight to f3, but you have to be careful you don't get kicked at some point. I mean, it's probably still okay to play that way, but I like what white did a lot. White challenged black immediately by opening up the queen side. The pawn gets supported, and here white missed the chance to play a4, just completely smashing open the queen side. You cannot take that pawn on a4 because they'll take on c4, and if you continue taking, they'll take your bishop, queen takes, bishop f3, and you are in big trouble. Queen c8 to protect the rook, but I don't even know that white wants to take the rook yet. They'll just play a move like queen a4 and let this position sit on the board for a minute, and you'll see that black is completely crushed. Look at their king. This knight is pinned. So this is not so good, right? All right, so after b5, a4 was white's chance to have a very, very strong advantage. But white makes a mistake, and white is an expert-rated player. Doesn't mean anything. Experts make lots of mistakes. He took the pawn. And when he takes the pawn, black takes back. White has the kind of advantage where all of their pieces are individually better than their opponents, but you can't really say that they have some clear win ahead. So white just took the file. Why not? Let's put a rook on an open file, and then black takes a very, very big chance here by taking the knight on e5. Sorry about that. They take the knight on e5. How to take back? Which pawn? Pause your video. Yeah, we take with the f pawn. Attacking the queen, opening the f file with the black king still in the middle. And here the position is still playable for black, believe it or not. As much space that white now has, as bad as this bishop looks here on c6, blocked by all these pawns, black is still reasonably okay here if they just move their queen away, maybe to a square like e7, get the king castle, complete the development. They are going to have an issue with this knight on a6. It's going to take some time to get back into the game, but black pretty much loses on the very next move by playing the move queen a3. Now, the move on the surface looks really good because you're attacking two undefended pawns. That's a double attack. You guys see it? You're attacking the c pawn, you're attacking the a pawn. You could try moves like queen to c2, and then you might get hit with bishop a4. Then you try to trade the queens, and before you know it, black is either trading off or improving some of their pieces, and white doesn't have a whole lot to say. Pause your video. White has a winning move here. Very strong anyway. Okay, did you find it? Good. Bishop takes c4. Very, very strong move. Black probably should just do something like castle and, deal with the fact that they just lost the pawn. White could try rook b3, which is a little trap. If you take the pawn, then queen c1 is going to trap the queen. This is pretty cool. Take here and then just rook a3. Ouchie. And the queen is trapped. So after bishop takes c4, I don't know, maybe they could just castle and play a pawn down, but they did not. They took the bishop, and now black is completely losing. Knight takes. That is a double attack. It attacks the queen and the d6 square. Why are we interested in the d6 square? It's going to come with a check. So we're down a piece. Queen takes on c3. We give the check. King comes to e7. Now, we could very well just take the pawn immediately on f7 with the rook check, which, I don't know, a computer might say is better than what happened in the game. But I really like what white did. White, before taking that pawn, played the move rook to b3, attacking the queen and protecting this structure. You see these pawns in the middle? These are kind of the guards in a sense. The only thing that white would have to be careful about is the light squares, and be very cautious of this pawn being attacked later in this middle game. You see the bishop up here on c6. It's pointing directly at your king. So if that bishop can combine with the queen somehow, you have to be careful that there aren't some tricks. So another reason why rook b3 is played is it guards this e-pawn, right? If you let this queen take this pawn with a check and you move your king here, then this bishop move could take a pawn with a check. Now, it might not mate the white king, but occasionally you might be able to get a perpetual check, where black can just keep checking you. But after the move rook b3, there is no counterplay. There's only one good square for the queen. It's a5. So what white did is they protected their structure, chased the queen to a bad square, rook takes f7, king d8, and now pause the video and find another winning move. There's more than one. Queen g4 was played, threatening mate in one. Just queen g5 is mate. Be very careful. Do not allow queen to e1 checkmate. Like you see this rook up here, it's guarding the f1 square. If that rook is not there, look at that. You lose the game in one move. Oh my goodness gracious. We don't want that to happen. Black didn't bother with the check, played h6 to stop the queen from checkmating, but white just took the pawn here, and the game is completely over. There's no way to stop the checkmate. I think black tried rook e8, and it's mate in two. You guys see it? Very good. Queen f6. I hope you learned something. Look, it's close to a 20-minute video, which I want to push you guys this year to be able to sit down and fully concentrate for that amount of time. And then also, read the notes in the blog, which hopefully will give you a solid half hour of chess study every week at a minimum. All right? Look forward to seeing you birds very shortly.